I'm going to use quarter size skirt slopers to show how to draft the basic flared skirt. The first step I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line from each dart point down to the hem. These lines will run parallel with center front and center back. We'll refer to these as our slash lines. We'll cut them from the hem up to the dart tip. Be sure you don't cut through the dart point. You want this pattern piece to remain as one. Our next step is to close the darts at the waist, shifting that fullness from the waist down to the hem. Using tape, you'll tape those darts closed. And you can see the difference already here. This principle is called unequal fullness, and all that means is that the fullness that you've added to the bottom is unequal to what's at the top. So this top waist measurement is now the exact measurement that will fit on body of your wearer. And now that we have altered our slopers, we're going to create our pattern so that we can cut material. So you can trace from either on top of your patterning paper, or you can slide the sloper underneath and trace this way. Both methods are fine, it's just whatever you prefer. So you want to start with your center front line. Center back. I like to map out the points that already exist. So waist and side seam, hem and side seam. The waist and hem extension that is perpendicular to the center line, you want to make sure that's a 90-degree angle. So traced here is just the modified sloper as is. You want to measure, so here was a point of slash and spread. You want to measure this distance here, that space from the hemline, and then divide that by 2. And you want to extend that measurement divided by 2 to the side seam. My hip point is here, so this new side seam at the hem, you want to blend with the true hip. We'll trace the front body on top. Again, start with the center front. Make sure your waist is squared from center. Same with bottom hem. Blend the waist retrace your hip point from top to the widest part of the hip. And same thing here, we're going to measure the distance between this gap and divide it by 2 to add to here. That just becomes an extension from the side seam. And there you can see your skirt front and back. Before we're finished, we want to make sure that the balance is equally distributed. So while we do not want to touch the balance of our top waist, we want to check that these measurements here are the same. I like to use a soft tape measure and stand it on edge to measure along the hemline. Whatever these measurements are, find the difference and then divide that difference by 2. So I need to make a shift inward from the front and out from the back. So it's just a little bit of give and take here. And then same rule as before, we only want to draw that line to the true hip point. And we can blend when we're done. And then if it's easier to read, go ahead and just make some slash marks through the lines that you are now going to disregard. And then once that is done, you can choose to make it permanent by using a black marker. So now that we know what our lines are, I'm going to copy them over. Same thing here, I always like to have kind of a 90 degree. At this point, you can erase and just clean up your lines. And now we're going to add our grain lines, seam allowance, and any other pattern details that we want to call out. So remember, this is the front, and here we have the back. For the front, I want this placed on center front fold. So we're going to use industry standard here to note that. Just going to create a box with arrows to this line. I'm going to talk in terms as if this were true to size or true to scale. I like to use 1/2 inch seam allowances, so that's what I'm going to be adding to the top waist here. I'm going to add that to the side seam as well. And then for my hemline, I want 5/8 inch. And this is just my preference of hem allowance here, just for this particular skirt. So know that hem allowance can always be adjusted. So to match front to back, we're gonna do another 5/8 inch hem allowance on the back. Half-inch side seam. Half-inch at waist. The tricky part here is I want this placed on fold. So with my center at fold, center front at fold, there will receive no seam allowance here. For the back, I've decided that I want to put my zipper at the center back. And for that, I'm going to give my center back 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to note the hip point here with a notch. I like to use T-notches. So this shows where the bottom of my zipper will end, just at the widest part of the hip. And then you want to note how many pieces you're going to cut of each. So I'm going to write cut 1 on fold here. Now since this is not a cut on fold, we're going to have to draw in the grain line that we want to use. So just make sure that runs parallel to the center back. And then to note lengthwise grain line, I just like to write LWGL. Now we want to make sure we don't confuse our pieces. So I like to start by listing off the style itself. So basic flare skirt, front body, piece 1 of 4, because we're about to create facing for the waist. You can go ahead and write your name and then end with a date. This here is back body. This is piece 2 of 4. Name and date. Date's really helpful if you're making muslins and preparing for fittings. And then you want to make sure that you're noting all of your hem and seam allowance. So I'm going to mark 5/8 inch hem allowance and do the same here. And then 1/2 inch. I'm just going to do abbreviated SA. SA is for seam allowance. We'll do the same here, 1/2 inch SA and 1/2 inch SA, all the way around, just so that everything's clearly marked. Okay, so there's your skirt pattern. The last touch that you're going to want to do is include notches. So here at this side seam, I've gone ahead and given a notch point here. We want this notch to then add up over here. So I'm going to do a double notch at this side seam because I've given a single notch at the center back where the zipper will end. So you can either measure from waist down or you can choose the walk it out method. So I've notched my side seams, and then just so that facing is clear, we can go ahead and put a notch here. I'm going to do a single notch on the front, and just do a double notch for the back facing. And then I like to go ahead and notch all of my seam allowances and hem allowances, which just helps me for when I'm cutting and sewing. I think that should do it.